Hello, good morning. It's morning here. And I have waken up quite early to be here. I don't know if you can tell. Or whether anyone's in chat. Maybe I should have that open. Putting out announcements and just waiting to see if people come in. I wanted to be here early because our slot starts at 9 and I don't want to be late for that. So now Discord announcement. Enjoy the music we have on today, which is like In Times of Peace by oh gosh, I really should know this. I'm going to check it. I don't want to get it wrong. In Times of Peace by Martin Johansson, who is one of our amazing composers. I'm going to mute for a second while I get this last announcement out. Announcements have been made. Ooh. I don't know if you could tell, but this is my first live broadcast here on Steam. It's probably noticeable. I would say it's noticeable. But I have some fun stuff planned, and I hope that it will bears up for us here. Let me now open the actual game, because that's pretty important for this live stream. And I'm also going to open the full screen on the screen that I didn't want it on. Alright, I'm going to switch that to the other screen. I'm just going to check that the game mode itself is working. Okay, the game appears to be working. Oh, very exciting. Now, do something very important, which is add my extra slides onto the slideshow. So I'm gonna do that in the background here really fast. Oh, there's still a USB. That's okay. The slides are fixed. There we go. Ooh. I believe we're also recording. Ooh, scary. Alright. Even though it's early for me, I have been having a great day too because I've had a good breakfast. And now I am here to play my game, show it off, and talk about incredibly nerdy things with you all. We are going to start a little bit closer to 8 p.m. EST. Currently it is 37 minutes on the hour for me. So we'll probably start in about 10 or 20 minutes. I realize that's a long span, but if I start too early, then people will be coming into the stream like, wait, you said it was 8 p.m. EST. And yes, it is going to start then, technically, but we're here now. So, I'm actually curious. I don't know if any of you are here in chat and actively listening, but I'd be curious to know what you want to hear from this stream, as it is meant to be a playing with history stream, and it's going to explore what we do in Of Sense and Soul to make it a much fuller, realistic, or believable Victorian narrative. So whether it's costuming or, well, I say costuming, but they're not actually in costume, are they? They're in their normal clothes. Regardless, it is just a, it's a fun little thing. Let me see if I can, let me just double check that the chat is working. because I think okay, it works. I know it works, and I also made a typo in that, which is fantastic. I love that. But yes, if you guys have any questions presently about what I'm going to be covering today, feel free to hop into the chat and let me know, and they may or may not be answered in the course of this little stream. Also, fun fact, I'm on OBS and I've got the music playing separately from my own input, so I can't hear what you're hearing right now. Later I will be able to, because it'll obviously be the game audio, but other than that, I hope you enjoy the music. And in the background here of this starting soon screen, which is very fancy, I know. It's a slideshow of screenshots from the game, so if you have played the game, some of these may be familiar to you. By the game, I mean the demo, which is only a little bit of the full game. But there are also some new screenshots that you won't have seen, because some of these are from chapters that are outside the breadth of the demo. So I thought it'd just be nice to give you a little bit of a look at it. We will start in 10 minutes. It is currently 8:40 a.m. and I wish I was the sort of technical savvy person with OBS and streaming to put a timer on the screen so that, as a courtesy, so you all know what to expect from the start time. But I tried and wasn't able to get it working. So here we are without a timer. It worked last night. But for some reason, when I pulled it up this morning, it just showed this little starting in text box, and it wouldn't show the timer whatever I did. So you will have to be content with looking at this pretty slideshow instead of a timer counting down to the moment where I have to start actually streaming. I'm going to mute for a while now and let you listen to the lovely music. And I will be back very shortly. there is no voice. Well, there's voice now. Hello, chat member who just said no voice at the moment. I had just muted so that I could have a little drink of water and all of that before I talk on end, and you have to listen to me for the next several hours. But, I'm glad to see you here. I will put it in the chat that we are starting in the pod. Am I? Okay. Let me lower music. Is that better? I think the music might be a bit loud because my mic is low currently. How is that? I think that should be a bit better now. Alright, good. Good to hear. I also have my mic a little bit further away than I might usually have it, so I think you might hear some of my clicking, but I think that's alright. And you might be able to hear my typing as well. It feels a little strange to be doing this from my official developer account instead of my main account, but you know, I think there's a first time for everything, and this is probably not the last live Steam stream that I'll ever be doing, so I can't wait to experiment more with this. And I'm back. Alright, it is approaching 7:50 p.m. EST. Or, if your clock is faster than mine, it's probably already 8 p.m. EST. Oh, no, 7:50 p.m. EST. But, what I'll do now is just get going and do a little introduction to this entire thing, and then talk a bit before we are going to dive into the game itself. Maybe do a little bit of, audio balancing, make sure that the audio is sounding okay from the game as well as from me, that nothing is too loud or too soft, and yeah. Alright, let's now transition to our first little title screen. Hello. Welcome to this special edition of Demo Dev Playthrough, which is dedicated to showing off how we play with history in Of Sense and Soul, and I am the lead developer, ingthing. It's lovely to be heard by everyone in the chat here, everyone in the chat / who is watching this on our Steam page. And what you're going to get in this stream is I will be playing the demo, and chapter by chapter we will be going through a few of the points of interest of what we have included in the game as part of making the Victorian setting of the game believable for all of you. And so what I hope you find in this is a better understanding of how we manipulate history and get to grips with it in creating this very Victorian story, but not detracting from its modernity, if that makes sense. So, without further ado, let us switch over to the game itself. Okay, now here you may have to let me know how the audio is sounding. This main theme, which is playing in the title screen right now, is actually how loud it will be the entire time, because all of our tracks are mastered and it's lovely. So, let's see. I just want to double check that the stream is working because I am nervous like that. And yes, indeed, I am seeing my own face here on the store page, so I can see that it is working. Lovely. Alright then. Shall we have a click through settings actually first, because I think that's one thing that I like to show off sometimes. So our settings, we do have some cool little things. We have the VA notification, which means that when notifications pop up, they are also there for like when voice acting scenes start, because we have partial voice acting. And then we also have audio captions that will show on the bottom left of the screen in order to cue in to all you players what sound effects are being played and when, and what music tracks are being played and when. We also have a little visuals settings menu where you can change the font display, and you can change the actual window and full screen display, as well as the amount of time it takes to proceed with the dialogue or proceed with the text speed. I've set it to my ideal settings, and I think that is probably the optimal speed for playing the game, because there's a lot of cinematography that happens in the game, and I hope that it also works for you all. I will note that I will probably not be able to talk or like read all of the dialogue that is being shown for the demo, because it is a long demo, and even doing 3 chapters, I am also doing 3 chapters and commentating on the history stuff, and you will see I have a presentation going on later. But anyway, for the gameplay settings, we have speaker contrast, which means that when people are talking, you can tell who is speaking or not. And then we have screen shake, toggle, we have a time choice toggle because there are time choices, and you can also skip different kinds of things in the actual game itself. Now, all this to say, none of the settings menu stuff is historical. I don't think I need to say that. It's not historically accurate, nor is it found somewhere in history. But it is a courtesy for modern players because this is a very modern game. It is a computer game. I don't think they had that in the Victorian times. Now, let's go back to this lovely little title screen. And why don't we... Ooh, there's a couple of minutes till we're actually live on the store page. Because 9 AM to 10 AM is our slot, right, for the actual Storytellers Festival feature. And so I might just bring that up on Steam so I can double check that it's going to be there. Yeah, I think we're up next right now. And that should be starting very soon. Why don't we just hop right in and create a new story? Here we are at the prologue. Them as part of history. You can see that the setup of this entire game is already just incredibly nerdy. Have you ever wondered about the personality struggles and joys of people long past? Doesn't really matter here right now, but I certainly have. As you know, I am here to commentate on the history, and I made this game. So, I actually also wrote this prologue. It was one of the first things I wrote for the game. So the question is why I want to know, why I've thought about the personalities, joys, and whatever of people long past. And I personally am a bit of both. Like, I want to know what they knew, but I also want to learn from their mistakes, because there's that whole thing of history repeating itself. But I think in making something like OSAS, I want to know what they knew and sort of live vicariously. Which probably isn't the right word, because I don't actually want to be a Victorian. But I think there's a certain charm of, like, connecting to people in the past. Here is London with all its smoke. Their faces are in the clouds. This is the part in all the streams I've seen of this demo, where people go, "Oh my god, their faces are in the clouds," and after that, you can't unsee it anymore. And of course, the smoke imagery is very period appropriate for the Victorian times. Specifically, this game takes place in 1875 and 1876. And so that's mid to late Victorian, I'd say. I get conflicting sources on that because it's not quite like late Victorian, it's like at the end of the middle. It's kind of like the gap between like Millennial and Gen Z, which is what I'm part of. Yes, that has been the prologue. I wonder whose route we're gonna get. Ooh. Interlude, butterflies.
Now then, let's see how we might go about setting the scene. Yesterday evening, a quiet neighborhood was shocked by scandalous reports.
Scandalous reports.
One of its residents was engaged in a most surprising endeavor. Residents were left to question whether they truly understood their fellow man at all. There. Even these ordinary little scandals can have a bit of the poetic in them, if one only knows where to look.
Oh! Ah.
Oh, that's a bit troublesome. I think we might still... Oh, it's still 59, alright. Sorry, I was just checking the store page again because I'm excited to see it on the festival page. Here we are with Mr. Brooks in the Daily Create offices.
Oh!
Honestly, I love the voice acting in this game, but I especially love Mr. Bentley as one of, like in terms of one of the side characters. I think he's just such a fun character, and his voice actor Eric Erickson did an amazing job with it.
Haha.
Now,
Of course.
you will probably notice, like, we have made some efforts to be quite diverse in the characters of this game. And that's kind of a conscious choice because in terms of historical narratives, a lot of the times there is a misconception that there were just white people in Victorian Britain or medieval England or wherever you are before the modern era. Which obviously, well, obvious to those of us in the know is not true, even dating back to the Roman times in the UK. Now, Hugo's Root, the editorialist. Here we are now with a little drawing room, and Hugo in his hat and gloves.
What?
Oh, a newspaper out. What could it be?
Really?
The matrimonial news. What could that be? Now, here I'll give you all a choice because, well, if you guys don't make the choice, I'll make it myself anyway. But I do have a little explainer on this newspaper, which I can either do now or leave until after this chapter. And I suppose since I know what the contents are, I will just go ahead with the chapter, and then we'll do all of the history at the end of the chapter. Here we have a mystery voice. Ooh.
Oh!
How are you?
I love Hugo's little soundbite. Now here is Camilla, and although I don't actually go into women's fashion in the Victorian era in context of this little stream, because that would take far too long, I will note that the colors that Camilla is wearing, that tan brown and the periwinkle, I did find from a fashion book that covered all the yearly trends in fashion from the Victorian era and a little bit more towards the modern era. That like periwinkle, lavender, and tan were very popular colors for 1875.
Thank you.
So there is historical basis for a lot of things in this game, including Camilla's dress colors. And you can see she has the bustle fashion, the bustle dress on. And you may have seen some Victorian clothing before, as far as fashion goes. And the 1870s is marked by a sort of a very decorative and ornate like form of dress. Like there was a lot of fringe and tassels and beads and everything. For the purposes of this visual novel, we've brought it down a little bit. just so that's not too distracted and to not make the process more difficult for myself personally when I draw sprites. But a lot of what we dress our characters in are based on excellent examples of garments, and I can definitely speak more on that later with Hugo and Seamus, who are the main characters. I go a little bit into their fashion choices based on what we've seen from the era itself. And so here Camilla is now expressing a little gentle familial concern about Hugo's being a very isolated individual. The subject of what? Marriage? Alright. Okay. Last time you think of those things. You know that there's a very classic period drama trope of like, you have to get married soon, you have to find someone to marry you. And in this case, instead of some Regency damsel, we have Hugo being egged on to find his sort of happy ending by his cousin. Hugo's a little awkward, you know, And I will go into the matrimonial news a little bit later after we see the whole matrimonial news segment. But I think there's some interesting things that we've discovered throughout the making of this game that have changed our sort of perception on including it and sort of making it suit our own needs in terms of narrative support. And yes, Camilla saying that, you know, women are often given a little more pressure than men might be in terms of seeking marriage. Yes, I think one of Hugo's Achilles' heels in this case is he obviously is not a people person. Oh, Camilla coming in and being all sappy. I do love her. You would also not believe how difficult it is to find references that are actually feasible to draw of Victorian hairstyles in terms of women's hair. Like, there was a heavy presence of thick braids and chignons. I think that's how you pronounce it, which are basically to pad out the hair and give it more volume and height. Oh, I love her. Also another very talented voice actress, Olivia Vidas, who voices Camilla, and of course Max Hertzfeld, who is playing Hugo. I just love our cast so much. And yes, so now Hugo's going to go and read the matrimonial news and we will see some examples that we have devised from said newspaper. Oh, here's my favorite transition coming. It's when,
Oh!
Oh yes, and her little hat and gloves. She has gloves on, by the way. I will pause and show you her gloves. They're here. There they are.
Yes!
It's now... Oh. Hopefully her word will keep his mother's mind at ease. That remains yet to be seen, I suppose.
Heavens.
All of them are from perfectly lovely ladies, of course, yes. Now I will note that a lot of these little adverts that Hugo is reading here are much shorter than might be paid for at the time. I think it was something like 40 words was the standard measure of how long an advert would be. None of them were suitable for him. None at all.
Honestly.
I will return to that advert a bit later. It'll be my presentation slide, so that we can read it together and see and break it down a little bit, you know. Oh, here's one of my favorite little animations of the game, of him pacing around. And there was a very conscious choice with the backgrounds of this game to make them foggier and more desaturated, and to paint them in a kind of rougher textured style, so that they contrast well with the sprites themselves. And I think that gives this game and this, like, if you look at the screen right now with the sprite in the background, I think it gives it a very distinct, like, feeling of depth, and makes it feel like a real space in a sense, but also adds to the historical feel of it. Intermission got to. Right. That letter to Miss SC in hand.
Heavens.
Oh, heavens. Love that. I love his little annoyed face.
Oh, goodness.
No sensible young lady would write back to him. Of course not.
Oh!
Of course not.
How are
Another
we feeling
day,
today?
another grind. Mr. Bentley is back
Good
in the
day.
house.
Really?
Now, I will be going a little bit into
Of course.
the Daily Creed office's background further down in this stream. And there are lots of little cool details that I'd like to share from it. Yes.
Really?
Yes, Mr. Colston.
Huh, you don't say.
Ooh, he spits. Ooh. Well, I knew that, of course, already, but he's always in a bit of a temper. I have to say, it's not an unusual thing for this man.
Hello.
Time for the mail.
What?
Huh?
Oh.
Oh, it's not a letter from his mystery pen pal.
Ah.
Oh!
Haha.
I beg your pardon. Ah, heavens.
Right?
Honestly.
Honestly. Adorable. Oh, it's Camilla. Expressing gentle familial concern. Now, it was interesting doing a little research for the letter displays in this game, because the Victorians had a whole bunch of etiquette about letters and how they should be written and what size paper they should be written on and what ink you should use and what your handwriting should look like. Of course, because it's a video game, we opted for just regular dialogue display text. But we also included a little handwritten flourish with a little signature from the sender of the letter on the bottom. And I think that helps capture a bit more of that handwritten feel that a letter usually conveys.
Tick-tock, tick-tock!
I absolutely love that soundbite of Mr. Colston's tick-tock, tick-tock. Amazing.
Of course.
Combust. Mr. Coulson as a character is very much inspired by the sort of industrious nature of much of the Victorian age. So there's a lot of we'll see in chapter 3, but he's a very fun character, I'd say. Oh, and it was so difficult to find a proper horse on cobble soundbite to use as like a sound effect here. One that didn't have cars in the background or didn't have like, you know, all the stuff the Victorians wouldn't have in it, or like phones ringing and such. Oh, there's a letter on top of the Evening Times, which isn't pictured in the background, but it's there, trust me.
Heavens.
We have the penny stamp on that letter there. Oh, Mr. Brooks. Note the incredibly tender music that starts playing in the background. There's something special about this letter. Ooh. Fine cup of tea or coffee if it is your preference. Yours hopefully, S. Charkham. Oh, look at him, he's blushing. What you'll notice most about Hugo's character is probably that he is just... At the start of the game, he is simply just the most timid thing. Like, he's not really used to speaking up for himself and is sort of going with the flow in everything in his life. So this advert and him responding to it is sort of the first step, shall we say, to his growing from that place as a person. Oh no, it's definitely not because he's nervous at all. Alright. Here we are approaching our fresh page of pen in hand. And he's going to write that letter. Now what
yes.
to write. Rowan, who wrote this chapter, is really good with Hugo's dialogue and is the lead on Hugo, actually. Alright, we're about to write this letter. To the most lovely and charming Miss Charkham, nothing could have possibly made me happier than receiving your response. Miss Charkham, and dear Miss Charkham, I was delighted to receive your reply. Now, I know the answers, so but I'm not gonna say whether or not I'm following them, and I'm gonna go with this one.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, that his hand may be a bit coarse for this application. And hopefully she can tell that it's meant to be miss and not a tangled ball of string. Ooh, foreshadowing. Next is, I look forward to meeting you as soon as can possibly be managed. Sunday is far too distant. Might I see you tomorrow? Which is very forward. I would be pleased to accept your offer and await further details so that we may meet. And I am honored by your swift reply, and your proposal suits me very well. I greatly look forward to making your acquaintance. I'm going to choose that first one again. Now, I think I'm pretty satisfied with that. You can see Hugo's little signature there at the bottom. Those were fun to come up with. Lots of looking at old versions of old letters from people who are already dead. Alright. It does feel a little Dickensian, doesn't it? It's a little floral and a bit too much.
Heavens.
Okay. Alright. And that is chapter 1. Now, before we go on to the next chapter, I'm going to take a little drink of water, and then we're going to get into the history. Alright. So, welcome to the slideshow portion of today's stream. Now, as I mentioned before, the Matrimonial News was a real newspaper, and this advert, although it's not something you exactly would find in that newspaper, was something that we crafted with it in mind and made it to work to the specifications of the newspaper, as well as just, you know, in general, be kind of gay. Like, it's meant to be quite coded in its language. But first, let me go into the Matrimonial News itself. So, in 1870, the Matrimonial News started up, and it was the first newspaper dedicated solely to Lonely Hearts ads. And you can see on that full page there were tons and tons of adverts in this newspaper, and it was pages of this. And you can see from some of those little examples, you know, they would often say the profession of the person who was writing the advert, or say a gentleman or a lady, and put their age. Some people put more specifics like their hair color and their eye color and their height, and some would even state their income. So like that scientific gentleman there who has income of, I believe it's £400, or is it 100? It's a little small on my screen, so I can't quite read it. But it was very much the Tinder or OkCupid or just the dating site of the day. And there is some precedent for personal adverts like these, dating from like the 1600s, and a little bit more closer to the 1700s, but there was never a dedicated newspaper for just this purpose of finding someone to marry or someone to spend your life with, or however you want to call it. And you can see also that there was a notice. This is an 1870 version of this newspaper. And essentially, our game kind of bends those rules a little bit in order to make it work for the premise of the game. Because usually, everyone would have to post notices, and everyone would have to post replies to notices through the same newspaper. So it says in the rules there, actually, in those 1870 rules, that every notice should state the age, general appearance, and position in life of the sender, and also some description of the lady or gentleman with whom a correspondence is desired. So it's sort of like, you know, some of them were very vague, where they were just like, you know what, I just want someone who's under 30 and who has some means, like in that second example for that solicitor. And then others would be quite specific with what they wanted. Maybe more towards the side of what personality that person has, or the side of what sort of income they have, or what kind of family they come from. But either way, like, this typically was about, you know, seeking a sort of heterosexual marriage, right? Like, you know, a gentleman seeking a lady, etc. However, there is evidence later on, I'd say towards like the 1920s, that there were just outright, like, personal adverts that were seeking gay relationships. And like during the Victorian era itself, there's no doubt really that there were people who were gay using these adverts as a way to find other gay men. But the language they used was quite coded. And like in this advert that we've written for Seamus to seek his own companion, it says that he's seeking a gentleman of an artistic nature. And that sort of sense of artistry and some other terms, or like poetics or artistry, would be a signifier of like, oh, this person is seeking someone who's in that lifestyle. Now, Hugo is artistic, but he doesn't necessarily understand what this ad is talking about. And you can see, based on those rules from the matrimonial news, that it's a little different from what they ask for. Because, first of all, Hugo doesn't write in the reply to the newspaper that we will see if you play the full game. It'll be in Seamus's chapter 1. He writes directly to Seamus, or writes to the editor, who then passes it along to Seamus instead of putting his own ad in. Whereas, if you can see in this third example with the scientific gentleman, Cart's desired of numbers, like, and he lists off a number of submissions from the newspaper because each of them was numbered. And carts were actually little card-sized photographs of the person who had submitted something to the newspaper. So it's kind of like, you know, requesting pictures of these prospective ladies. What would happen then is the ladies would then send their carts to the editor or whatever, and then, you know, be sent off by the editor to that person. And of course, at the bottom here in these rules, you'll see all introductions are given on the understanding that the gentleman shall pay a fee to the editor within a month after marriage. So we have definitely bent those rules a little bit for our purposes, and this particular newspaper ran from 1870 to 1895 and then restarted a little while after. However, there were tons of other matrimonial news, like, copies that emerged after the first issue of the matrimonial news. So there was really no shortage of different platforms to seek a partner on. And that is, of course, the premise of our game. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about Hugo's drawing room, because that's one of the first, you know, that's a pretty big setting for Hugo. And I want to talk a little bit about the choices that were made for it. So here we have a middle-class mid-1860s style drawing room, as far as we can approximate, at least. And you can see that it has sort of very muted colors. Like, it looks pretty clean and bright. There's a lot of reds, pinks, greens, browns in this space, and that's because it is meant to be a middle-class drawing room, and specifically one of a lodging house where it's run by a widow. So she's the one who really has taken command of the space, and that's there's sort of been a traditional feel to it, and it's just a little bit muted in all senses. And I'd like to draw your attention to these two examples of furnishings. So we have, first of all, the two cats on the mantle. These cats were Staffordshire porcelain figurines, and you would see these in a lot of historical interiors, Victorian interiors, as dogs or birds, and cats, of course. And oftentimes they have these very, very disconcerting stares, as you can see with these two yellow cats. These are also date from about 1860, the mid-Victorian era, and their eyes are not very comforting. The same remains for all of the Staffordshire porcelain dogs and cats I have seen, but we've decided to include them in this background in particular because we wanted to bring a little bit of cat lady into the space. And our background artist, I said that he could put Garfield into the backgrounds as for fun, as long as it was Victorian. So imagine my surprise when, at least like a full year and a half after receiving this background, I finally zoomed in and saw that the cat on the right has Garfield's face. And I love that. I love that about I just love seeing little surprises in this game, and I think it's very fun. You have to zoom in pretty far to see the Garfield in this, but yeah, it's still fun. Now, the second example of an interior furnishing I want to explore is that chair, which is actually to the left and concealed by the rest of the slide. But this chair is, I believe it's called a lady sitting chair, and you'll notice that it has a lower arm and it has a sort of reclined back in order to accommodate the clothing that women wore. Where with a bustle, for example, although you can sit with any form of crinoline or bustled garment, it would allow extra space for ladies if they wanted to sit down and not ruin their dresses or not kind of have a giant mass behind them. And the image below is an example from, I believe, the Hampton and Sons catalog from, I think, about 1880. Now, the main inspirations for Hugo's drawing room were actually the rooms from Carlisle's house. So this is the parlor and the drawing room, respectively, in that house. Again, the sort of middle-class, mid-Victorian interior. And you can sort of see there's a lot of green and red going on. Those were very popular colors at the time. And there is a big mirror, as there is in Hugo's drawing room background. That was quite a popular choice in terms of things to put on top of mantles. And last but not least, for this chapter, I'd like to go into Hugo's design. Now, you might look at him and sort of understand that he is Victorian. He's very Victorian looking. But I want to go a little bit more into what choices we made for him specifically, because he's of a certain station and he has a certain career. So Hugo's design is based off of the idea that at this point in time, 1870s, or probably starting from the 1860s, don't fact check me on that. I don't have my notes here. But there was something called a set of dittos, or a sack suit. I believe sack suit was more of the American term, or vice versa. Could be either. It's early. It's still early here. But that was essentially a simple matching suit, because prior to this time, there wasn't necessarily a notion that suits should all match. Like you can see in the bottom right example, there was often a lot of mismatching of the jacket and the trousers that people would wear. And that was very common in the 1860s and before that as well. But towards the end of the century, there was more of a shift towards matching tops and bottoms, as well as matching vests inside. And you can see on the left there is a sack suit that is in linen, and it has a very I believe it's an 1870s example as well, and it has a front that is a cutaway front, and what that means is the sides of the jacket actually slope away from the body as it goes down, and oftentimes this wasn't actually meant to be buttoned. Any buttons below the first or second ones at the top often were just left open so that the wearer could show off the vest that was underneath. Because vests, as you can see in that bottom right example, and as well as that top left example, were a way of showing off your personality and showing off your status. Here we have Hugo in a sort of sack suit for his outers, so like the brown trousers and jacket he's wearing. And we also have him in a contrasting vest, which isn't as de rigueur for the time, especially for someone of his station. He's middle class, he's a clerk, essentially. So it's more of a way to differentiate him in the cast than it is to really adhere too much to fashion, or what is understood of historical fashion. And he has spectacles, of course, because that's sort of his endearing character trait is that he likes to read a lot and write a lot. And as far as his collar and tie, if you see in that photo on the bottom, right next to Hugo, there's actually more of a popularity or presence of the turn-down collar, just in this period, where in previous times you might have more of the stand collar, which Hugo is wearing, where it stands up against the neck and then kind of cuts in the middle. And that particular collar would go up and down in height, depending on where you were in the era. Like, towards the early Victorian, you would actually see those be almost up to the person's jaw. And then it sort of lowers in the middle of the century and then kind of goes back up again for the Edwardians. But he has a stand collar sort of to signify he's a little bit more traditional. And not traditional in the sense that he himself is traditional, but that he's adhering to the status quo. And the tie that he's wearing is a four-in-hand necktie. And what that is like, it was a style that was becoming more popular with clerks of the time because there was a rise in mass-manufactured fashion that came with the kind of migration of a lot of people to the big cities to work. And so it was more popular to have quick, easy options to put on. So whereas previously they might have had like an ascot or a bow tie, etc., a four-in-hand was sort of the new standard for office workers. And one last thing that I would like to note here is Hugo is consciously designed with facial hair and body hair. And not only is that to reflect reality and like humans in general, who a lot of them are hairy, this is also a choice he made for the game itself and the era that he is living in, because having a beard at this time was sort of the fashion. It was sort of a mark of dependability and stability, I'd say. And having him wear this beard is almost like a bit of a mask for him, because he doesn't quite fit in, but if he can look the part, and if he follows the rest of the herd, then he's not going to stand out so much, even though at work we see him already sort of being singled out for being a little different than everyone else, and not just doing the work, and actually wanting to, pursue a more literary version of what is essentially penny journalism. Okay, so that is the overview for Chapter 1. And I will now be going on to Chapter 2 if you all are, if there are no questions here. So now you should be seeing the title card for Chapter 2. Do let me know if you don't see it. It is a big blue screen. Alright, I believe it's showing on my end there on the screen. Oh, you have a question. What is the question? Alright, the question from Chaos Weekly is, were there any things that you found in your research to be accurate to the time but chose against using because it was garish or silly by modern standards? That's a really good question. Now, there are a lot of things about the Victorians that were garish or silly. But what we attempted to do is, there's sort of a balance to strike between the modern perception of the Victorians, or history in general, versus what actually occurred in the Victorian times. Because there's a lot of boiling down of the Victorians that is taught in general. Like, you can't really encompass the entire era and what it was like through a history lesson. As far as things that I chose to include or exclude, the Victorian women's fashion is a good example, because with Camilla, for example, we chose to dial down the opulence of the clothing of Victorian women, given that Victorian women did have a range of fashions and levels of kind of handicraft to fashion, depending on, if you paid less, then you would have a little bit less decorated of a gown, versus if you paid more, then you could, hire something bespoke and like get something made by someone in Paris. So not so much things that we took out because they were garish or silly, but more things that were made as a conscious decision to make it easier to make the game. So yeah, that's sort of the long and short of it. Other than that, I think we also have done away a little bit with a lot of the language that we used, and the some of the etiquette that was required for things. We've kept the basics down of, for example, how to introduce your friends to other friends, and what the structure of letters looks like. But we do want it to be very palatable to a modern audience, so you'll see that the dialogue has a historic feel, but isn't necessarily the most Dickensian or rooted in the period. Alright, let's go on to this next chapter with Seamus.
What?
Here we are with Seamus and James. Two gents at the club. And we shall soon see why they are there. This is such a tone shift from earlier. And here we have Seamus's study. I love this background. This is one of the ones I worked on. So you can bet those peacock feathers are ones I drew by hand. Oh yes, the stuffed penguins. Hardly the first time he's met a potential suitor indeed. Now, I'm not going to go into the particulars of this background after this chapter, because there's another background that is way more important. But this particular background is actually inspired by like later Georgian interiors. Because it's not actually Seamus's house, he inherited it from his uncle. And so there is sort of a there's a different style than he might choose for himself. Of course, we have a butler because it's a Victorian thing, and we have to have a butler, of course. But all of the furnishings in this room are, butler included, of course, are kind of taking inspiration from different auction websites, actually, because that's where I tend to find a lot of references for, you know, these kinds of things.
I see.
Because rarely anywhere else do you find actual like turnarounds of furniture items or decor items. Whereas on auction websites, because everyone wants to see every angle, you can see like the front, the side, the back, etc. And it's fantastic drawing reference, so that's what I would recommend if you are to draw many historical interiors.
Take care.
Here we are on the street once again. Crosby Hall, his final selection. A little drum roll, please. There it is, Crosby Hall. Now, those of you who are familiar with Shakespeare, perhaps, or, you know, the history of the English monarchy, may have heard of Crosby Place or Crosby Hall before. That's because it is a real location in London, although it's now been moved from its original address in Bishopsgate to Chelsea. And of course, we have to have them put on and take off their hats whenever they're going out and in. He will be here soon. Who could it be? It's Hugo.
Here it goes.
Oh.
Pardon me,
Voice
but
line.
are you Mr. Brooks?
Oh, why, yes, I am.
That was Sean
And
Mendel.
you
And
are...
here's Max Hertzfeld. And they are the best. They did so well with this.
Perhaps Crosby Hall was the wrong place for this after all.
Ooh. Here's what is affectionately termed as the anime sparkle scene over at OSAS HQ. All the ethereal glow to his figure. Ooh, his eyes.
Like sunlight on the moors. Vast and verdant. Contained in just that gaze.
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I
apologize if I startled you. I just had to be sure I had found you.
That is just about as poetic as Seamus
I
gets in this.
beg your pardon. Of course.
A little bit of tension regarding the matrimonial news advert. And you'll see this later, but I find Crosby Hall to be the most interesting background of the game, not only because it's you know, a real place, but also because it just is such a unique space. Like, imagine having your first meeting in this
I don't believe
cavernous
it.
banquet hall. That, you know, is once where, like, I think it's like Sir Thomas More and a few other there's a long history behind this place, and it used to be a palace, but in the Victorian times, I believe from 1884 onwards until 1907, it was a restaurant. Or 1860. Well, 1864, I think. Because otherwise I wouldn't have used it as a location for them meeting in 1875. Actually, one thing that was said to me when we had our previous demo out, which was in 2020, is that people didn't know that Hugo was taller than Seamus.
Really?
And that's because we had them displayed a little differently in the game, but also because their demeanors are so different. Where Hugo is so he makes himself small, whereas Seamus, he is a bit more confident in most situations.
Oh!
Oh, he's a writer. An editorialist. in the modern day, it's the same as the meaning is now here, but that he writes editorials in newspapers or magazines. But as far as I can find or tell, editorialist wasn't actually a real job title in the Victorian times, because editorialists would be written by editors. But the idea behind Hugo being an editorialist is because he works for a disreputable newspaper. Mr. Colston is the editor, but he doesn't actually do a lot of the writing. So he pawns it off on Hugo to write the editorials. Oh, here we are at our first timed choice. We're not going to time choices because I know the answers. Background, he's from Shropshire, and he enjoys the theatre. And what shall we do here? You know what? I'm going to wait for the timer to run out. Oh no. How could he not know what to say in this situation? I love this sequence. I don't think a lot of people get it in the demo, but it's very fun to get this part. It's just a cute little thing, you know? He's glad he's not the only one who gets a bit lost for words upon meeting someone new. Yes. Alright. And here comes our first major voice scene, and I'm going to be quiet for this one, because I want it to shine by itself.
There's been a tension lingering between us, but it could just be my own fretting.
Mr. Charkham?
Yes, Mr. Brooks?
I fear I must be honest with you about something.
Please. Go on.
You see, that is to say...
No.
Heavens, I'm sorry, Mr. Charkham.
No.
You see, I made an error in reading your advert. I had thought that you were... that this was...
You thought I was a woman?
I'm afraid so, yes.
Oh, Desire for Connection, Seamus's theme. I absolutely love this track, by the way.
How could... Then why... I see. Well, these things happen. I'll waste no more of your time then, Mr. Brooks.
Mr. Charkham.
Terribly sorry for the mix-up. Please, stay and enjoy. I'll take care of the check.
Mr. Charkham, wait, please.
Ooh.
I apologize for my misunderstanding. Please, if there's anything I can do to remedy it, tell me what it is and I will do my best.
He's apologizing to me. Oh, it's almost worse than if he'd shouted me down or fled. Mr. Brooks, there isn't anything to remedy. As I said, these things happen. You needn't concern yourself with the matter any further.
But I would like to concern myself with it. That is to say, I may have operated on incorrect assumptions about your identity, and I don't think I am what you were looking for. But I don't see why you should have to leave. I don't see why we can't continue to become acquainted. Your perspective may differ, of course, but I don't believe a conversation with an interesting partner is ever wasted. Though I do suppose that my capacity to be an interesting conversational partner isn't nearly as great as your own.
Good Lord, what a truly fascinating afternoon this has turned out to be. I'm reminded that I'd started this encounter thinking it would be a thrill to meet a virtual stranger. Still, this wasn't what I had in mind. Though I can't help but feel a swell of gratitude for the man. He really is taking this much better than many would in his place. And my goodness, but he's determined. Even as the nervous twitch of his fingers belies the set of his brow. Oh, damn it all. On the contrary, Mr. Brooks, I believe your claim is very strong indeed.
Then...
It would be a waste of good food not to stay and savor it, wouldn't you say?
Of course.
Now, I believe we are due for a change in topic. I imagine working at a newspaper must keep you very well abreast of current events.
And that is the voice scene. Oh, I love it so much. That's what happened. Back to the club where Seamus is having a breakdown.
What?
Oh,
And just as I mentioned before, you'll see that James here is wearing a turn-down collar instead of a standing collar. Whereas Seamus here has a peaked lapel, and I'm going to talk about that later.
Oh my!
Sorry, peaked lapel refers to his suit jacket lapel, but I meant his collar is winged.
oh dear. I see. Oh.
Ooh, who is Miss Hawthorne? Here you can get a real close-up of James's suit texture.
Absolutely.
It's interesting in this context. We can see, and probably saw from the voice scene, that Seamus's reaction to this entire situation is maybe a little bit overblown, but now we have a little more context because of this Miss Hawthorne that seems to strike a nerve with Seamus. Here's Mr. Evans.
Hello.
Again, another very industrious type.
Oh, look who it is.
Hello.
Oh. Oh my. What?
I don't believe it.
Oh. Oh.
Love this little bit about the pistols and the duels.
What?
Oh, look, we had good enough answers that we got this little scene.
Oh.
Oh,
Oh my.
Crab. Crabby.
Oh. Oh.
I also do love James's voice acting. He's played by Oliver Smith, and it's just those sound bites never fail to make me smile. But I can say that for a lot of characters in this game.
Mr. Charkham, if I may, I have very much enjoyed our afternoon. To be candid, this experience is rather new for me on all fronts. I'm afraid my social sphere is rather lacking. But even if it weren't, I'm certain I'd feel just as I do now. That is to say, at your convenience, I would very much like to continue our conversation on another day.
Oh, he's so cute. Here's the angst. This poor man.
This passing fancy will never bear fruit,
Ooh.
even if he's within reach.
Oh, these
And
lines.
yet, I'm simply left with the desire to know him.
Oh. One of my favorite lines in the entire first act. Now, what I'll do is save the game, of course. But let's go on, and I'll have a little bit of a sip of water first. And now we will go on to the, once again, the presentation side of things. So, here we are once again with the presentation, and now we'll discuss Seamus's design, because we just covered Hugo's earlier, but we're here to Seamus's, and this is Seamus's chapter. So, like I mentioned earlier, we're kind of intentional about how we dress the characters based on their station in life and what their general disposition is like. So Seamus's design is very much based on the slightly higher class Victorian fashion. He does have a cutaway coat, which I mentioned is a coat that kind of slopes down towards the back along the sides. And he does have a longer coat. And this is what we would call a frock coat, or a cutaway frock coat. And that was pretty common for men to wear in the mid-Victorian towards 1870s period. As you can see from the painting next to him, that is a painting from the 1870s where that man is wearing a very light gray suit, so that was sort of the inspiration for his suit colors. And we did have him in the matching top and trousers, just to make it a little bit more cohesive for the purpose of making the visual novel and making it a little bit easier to make. But you can see in all of the examples of men's wear above that they have different trouser and combinations with the jacket and the vest. So it's definitely not like the way it is in menswear today, where everyone's wearing a suit that's one color. There was a lot of variation in that. In addition to that sort of uniform, I guess, with the suit, we also have him in a double-breasted vest, which is actually not as common in this time period. Although you can see that the man in that photograph to the right is wearing one. And you'll notice also that in comparison to other periods or modern waistcoats or vests, you can have the actual collar or the closure of the vest be higher. And this was in part due to wanting to show a bit of the waistcoat outside of the jacket, because the jacket would kind of close off the top very quickly. And it would also be there to show off the necktie. And we also have him in a sort of silk ascot with a pin in it, and that is also a pretty common choice for the Victorian period. And we have him with a wing collar, which by this time in the 1870s is not as common. But for Seamus, he is sort of, if you kind of saw from his intro there, he is a little higher class and he lives in his uncle's old house. So he is sort of emulating his uncle in a way, and having him in a slightly more outdated form of collar and with a vest is kind of one way of signifying that he is a little bit affected by the past. And you'll notice also that we have him here without facial hair, which for this time period wasn't usual, because facial hair was so common for men, especially, and it was seen as a sign of, like, you know, it was distinguishing. But in terms of leaving him, beardless, it was purposefully chosen that way because, in comparison to Hugo, he is more modern of a person, and he is trying to diverge from his past. And towards the 1880s and 1890s especially, like, you would see the trend of facial hair becoming shorter and even disappearing altogether for younger people. And this was also in reaction to contesting the previous generations, right? Because, you know, the previous generations were very into facial hair, whereas the younger generations, in sort of defiance or rejection of the past, would only wear mustaches or be clean shaven. So that's sort of an overview of Seamus's design. And I'll also now go on to Crosby Hall. So this is the place where Hugo and Seamus meet, right? And it is an incredibly pivotal point of the story and their relationship in general. So we needed a setting that would match that sort of importance. And what we landed on is not the Daily Creed offices, actually. It was Crosby Hall. See if my slides might have mixed up. But anyhow, Crosby Hall, as I mentioned before, is a real place in London. And this excerpt from Fun magazine from the day's work in the city by one of the other page, which if I move my face, you can see the source there. It's called A Day's Work in the City by one of the underpaid, and at 12 o'clock it was lunch at Crosby Hall. And this was the actual part of the article that really struck me when I was reading this and searching for a location to put Hugo and Seamus in for their first meeting, is this one. I really don't think that half of us had a notion that there was much poetry in the city till we found that old banqueting hall, spread out with tables laid for dinner, and ate our plate of roast and boiled, and drank our bitter or our claret or our sherry, and watched the young ladies that wait on us flitting about, and looked up at the grand old oak roof, and blinked at the stained glass, and lost ourselves in the great bay window, and dreamed of Richard III and Sir Thomas More, and all the rest of the swells that had dined there before us. I apologize for the dogs barking outside. That is not in my control. But essentially what this is saying about Crosby Hall as a restaurant at the time, which this was written in 1868, is that it was a very popular place for salarymen, for clerks to kind of go and dine, especially during lunch hour. And the unique thing about this place is that they catered to everyone, basically. If you see here, I have mapped this entire place out from a floor plan of Crosby Hall from its time in at Bishopsgate Street. And on the left here, you have the entrance, and that illustration you see here is actually a depiction of the luncheon hall, which was the first thing you would see when you enter the restaurant. And that would be a more casual place to eat with more sandwiches and quick foods to have. Whereas where this background is drawn is actually the banqueting hall, which is much more grand. And you can see in these little photos I have collaged around, those photos are ones that were taken in 1907, which was right before the, I believe it was the demolition of the place. And that's what we based our background off of, just, where you see on the right here, we have a little 3D model of the roof of the ceiling of the banqueting hall. And this banner on the side of the wall reads, "And presently repaired to Crosby Place." And I believe that's a reference to Shakespeare. I think that's a line in King Richard III, I believe. And it was a trial to actually get that information. We had to search for a long time because the photos that we had of the place from 1907 didn't display the text very clearly. And so we finally managed to find it, and that is now a detail that in the background that probably won't be seen as much, but is there, and I'm happy about it. At the bottom right here, you can see some architectural diagrams of the actual moldings and carvings of Crosby Hall, and that's what I used to model the roof off of. And here you can see a side-by-side of the Crosby Hall 3D model that I did in SketchUp versus the final background. There was no way we were going to be able to include every detail we wanted to in this background, and so what I negotiated with our background artist Joseph was that, you know, instead of you figuring out all this perspective and figuring out where to put things on your own, I'm going to model it first because it's a complex space, and that way when you go and draw it, everything is laid out for you, and that definitely like expedited the process a lot. Now I'm gonna just quickly check what slide is next, because if my slides are a bit out of order, then yeah, okay, so I had a slide there previously for Crosby Hall, but before we go on to the third and final segment of the stream, why don't we take a little intermission and take a little 5-minute break. We'll be back at, actually, let's say on, I believe right now it is 9:30 EST. So we will be back then, and I will put that in the chat. If you have any questions at this point, I would be happy to answer them if you put them in the chat as well. Alright, hello. We are now back. Can you actually see me? Oh, you can't. And we are back with Chapter 3 of the Sense and Soul demo. This will be the last chapter we cover today, even though there is one more because this stream has gone on long enough already. And by the time we finish with it, it will be already lunchtime my time, and we started at about 8:30 a.m. So, yeah. Now, here we have Hugo again, kind of lamenting the strange turns that his first meeting with SC have taken. And we'll get another glimpse of that lovely drawing room and Camilla soon.
Oh, goodness.
Yes.
Oh, Camilla. She's about to find out.
Really?
Ah. Ah.
Ah, yes.
Ooh, time to go into Hugo's assignment. Now, here we are returning to the Daily Creed.
Ah.
Honestly.
Tick tock, tick tock.
Yes, Mr. Colston. Good day.
Ah, look who it is.
Oh, Risky Affairs is this track, and it's one of my favorites in the game.
No.
By Henry Takala.
Of course.
I think this is the perfect, like, Age of Steam soundtrack. Like, I think there's sort of two sides of the Victorian era that are often portrayed, and I think one side is the more romantic, Victorian side, and the other is like Steam engines. You know, it's like this is the age of industry and the growth of the economy and such. So I like to think that Mr. Coulson here is our little comedic relief / nod to that and notes and queries session. And it's Hardwick's science gossip. I'll be talking about that later because it's actually a real thing.
No, no, no.
ELO is ALS. And ALS stands for Associate of the Linnean
Oh.
Society, which is a
Dr.
scientific
Lewis.
society. And I think it's still active.
Jolly good?
What?
Oh.
I love how nosy Mr. Coulson
Don't
is
say.
in this scene. He doesn't even know anything about science, and he's just like, ugh, this guy. This guy always going on about birds.
Really?
Though I will say, like, I won't cover this too much in the presentation segment, but there was a real concern that birds were being too sympathized with. It was really only in the Victorian era and towards the end of the Victorian era where birdwatching became more of a popular pastime and therefore more sympathy towards nature and birds themselves was popularized. Controversy.
Unbelievable.
There Mr. Coulson goes. Is it socialist? Or is it vegetarianism? Which is also a thing that started sprouting more wings in the Victorian times. Vegetarianism, that is. There were vegetarian societies, and there were often caricatures in magazines like Punch magazine about
Oh, goodness.
Victorian vegetarians.
Jolly good?
One that comes to mind is, I don't have an image of it right now, but it's a picture where there's a lineup of humanoid root vegetables, and it's a joke that
Oh my!
vegetarians are what they eat. They just become parsnips and radishes and such.
Oh.
Ooh, a choice. So I'm gonna go for this one. This chapter is the first we're kind of really seeing of Hugo's main storyline in the game. So, as bird-brained as it sounds, this is, there's a lot about birds in this game. You probably saw in Seamus's study earlier,
Oh!
that he had peacock feathers and the penguins on the side. And believe it or not, birds will come in later for him as well.
Yes!
It wasn't that intentional, but it just happened that way. So, the Victorians and birds.
Of course.
Ooh, another challenger appears.
Oh!
It's Miss Lee. And she is
How may I help
the
you?
only one without a body in this game. She has a desk and chair though.
Yes.
She's been allowed to sit. But there's Miss Lee. Once again, we've tried to include some more people of color in this game than what you might traditionally see in Victorian stories, and there it is.
Of course.
But I think that, there was definitely a presence of Miss Lee herself is I think of her as Chinese. And while it probably wasn't as common to have a Chinese woman working in a office setting, I would say it's feasible. Question: is this game woke? It depends on what you mean by woke. I don't think we shove it in your face. It's more so, they're there. I guess it's woke if you think it's woke. But otherwise, it's more just, we want to reflect humanity as a broad thing. And that sounds very lofty of me. But, you know what? Yeah, we are woke. We are woke. Oh dear. Here emerges the unscrupulous management tactics of Mr. Colston. Miss Lee looks at him again. Ooh. Oof. What's really funny about Miss Lee, who is played by Su-Ling Chan, she has a lot of disappointed sound bites. And most of her sound bites are just like, and ugh. Which I think accurately reflects the general disposition of hers.
Goodbye.
Good day.
Oh, Dr. Lewis.
Here we go with Dr. Lewis.
Good day.
I see.
Really?
You don't say.
If you don't mind.
What?
Throw it all into It's a fair question, though.
Ah, yes. Really?
Ho!
I can imagine.
I see.
Yeah, apologies for my slightly lower audio because there has been some inconvenient drilling that has taken the opportunity to run audio. But that article he's mentioning now has to basically this is a real article, and if the drilling allows me to, I will explain about it later.
Brilliant. Did you know? In conclusion,
No, it's quiet now, but I don't know if it'll do anything at all.
Really?
But I have brought a towel with me. And I have seen on voice actor Twitter
I see.
that you can use something to insulate your space, even if you just throw a duvet over your head. And my dog is on my duvet, so I can't really get to my duvet. But I have a towel. So maybe that will help. But I see that we are up to Dr. Lewis taking his leave. And also, the moment I got that towel, the drilling has paused. Which is just great. Hopefully this will start off again.
Thank you.
Now, as far as
It's been a
specimens go
pleasure.
in the Victorian era, a lot of those specimens we see in estates in
Until next time.
in the British countryside, and museums are live stuffed specimens, but that's probably not Dr. Lewis's style. This track is called Sightline, and that's Hugo's theme. I think it's lovely. With the soundtrack in OSAS, it's not actually completely historically inspired, but we have gone for a classical music approach so that it kind of fits with the themes of the game a bit more. And so it's more of a contemporary piano, but I still quite like it. Here we go, Hugo with his writing again. Journaling time. Now, as the writing choice menu gets pulled up, I do want to note a little something in this user interface that might be of interest if you are still here and watching. Because as this is the Playing with History episode of this broadcast, the actual choice menu for the letter writing and the journal writing segments features a writing slope in the background, as you might be able to see. And the writing slopes were angled pieces of desk furniture that would be effectively some people call them Victorian laptops. Because people would store their papers and everything in them, as well as ink and pens, and they would open it up on a desk during travel or even just at home and write using it, because in the past, using a writing slope would help with a lot of handwriting. The angle would just be different when you're writing, whereas today we tend to write on flat surfaces, like flat desks, without an angle. And so if you're hunching over a piece of paper at your desk versus if the paper is angled, it's going to be a lot easier to write and see it. And I wish I had one. Now, we're in the diary composition section, so we've got to choose what order these go into. I'll read the options here. The initial meeting with Dr. Lewis went better than I had hoped. I'm still not altogether certain of this assignment, but I feel I will enjoy speaking to the man and learning more about scientific enterprises at the very least. While a part of me already mourns the seeming loss of the quiet, admittedly rather solitary existence I have for so long enjoyed, perhaps Camilla is right. Mr. Sharkham's continued correspondence almost surprises me, despite the fact that we had discussed it. A part of me had convinced myself I'd entirely imagined any extent to which she had enjoyed my company. So I'm gonna go for him first, because I think it's fun. Just a little bit of setup for the next chapter where Hugo does go to the club, which is always a hilarious thing to say, because in the modern sense, when we say club, it's usually one of those dance clubs or bars. Next still right, Dr. Lewis. And last but not least, oh, font choices. It's not that deep, honestly. The font that we use for a majority of everything here is a font called Laura. I wanted to find a serif font because it has a more traditional feel. It's more in tune with the Victorian era, of course. And this one has a very nice italic variant that I think has a lot of sensitivity and is sort of flourished. And so I felt that it would work very nicely for the themes of the game and as a main font for the game. Although I will note in the menus section in the visuals, we do have a dialogue font changer, where you can change the dialogue font to Fira Sans or Selexiad, where Fira Sans is a sans serif option and Selexiad is our dyslexic friendly option. We will confirm this for now. Now, that marks the end of this section of the game. Now, let's save, and we are unfortunately approaching the end of this stream, because, as I said, Chapter 4 would be a little bit too much to cover today. But now let us go on to the presentation section of Chapter 3. So, Chapter 3 is mainly based in Hugo's life, right? It's Hugo in his drawing room with Camilla, and then it's Hugo at work. So, of course, we have to talk about his workplace. The Daily Creed offices are essentially a very small, there's the drum again, I can hear it. You probably can. It seems like it's showing up on my microphone feed. But I will, to the best of my ability, bring my mic closer to my mouth and mute when I'm not talking. So the Daily Creed is a, as I said, disreputable newspaper, and their office is meant to reflect. Oh, I'm getting word that it's very loud. Alright, give me a second because I'd like to adjust the microphone setting just a little bit just to see if I can make it better on the Alright. I think that should be a bit better. I've applied a new noise filter onto noise suppression. Yes, it would have been quieter in the Victorian times, I agree. Well, depends on where you were. Certainly, there wouldn't be high rises really in Victorian London. By the way, there's no drilling going on right now because whoever is doing the building maintenance right now hates me. But now that we are back to our presentation, I'd like to continue with the Daily Creed offices. As I mentioned, they are a disreputable newspaper. They would essentially be a tabloid in modern times. And an interesting note about that is tabloids weren't really a thing before the 1880s. Like, there wasn't as much sensationalized news in the sense of trying to target specific people. Most of the scandal came from crimes and like horror stories, essentially. So sometimes if you hear like penny journalism as a term, that's originates in the Victorian era, where journalists were paid, I think, a penny per word or something like that. And a lot of the most sensational stories at the time were murders and like thieves and etc. And now Daily Creed is one of those papers, and it is one of the ones that kind of like tries to get away with seeming reputable, but it really isn't. So to reflect that, this actual office that I've created for them is very rundown. So you can see there's like paint kind of ripping on the walls. There's a little portrait of the boss just looking down on all of the employees to make sure that they're doing their job. And it's kind of just a dark and a little bit of a dreary place. But I'd also like to note all of the cool office things that I've included in this background. So you can see on the right hand side, on next to the desk. By the way, the desk itself is a taller desk, and you'll see that in the reference images in the next slide. But there's a wastebasket, and I don't know why it's so funny to me, but in a lot of older pictures of offices, the actual like bin would be a basket, like an actual woven basket. Whereas today we'd have like plastic or metal or whatever amount of variance. And okay, by the way, the drilling is now slightly on, so hopefully it's better now. But in addition to the wastebasket, on the desk there, you can see that there is a little stapler, a Victorian stapler, on the corner of the desk, and in the ledger on the actual desk, we have a armrest that is slotted into the side of the ledger, and that was there because a lot of ledgers were massive, like bound volumes. So a rest would be necessary for any clerks who wanted to write appropriately in the ledger, just to elevate their arms a little bit so that they could write. We also have on the top left small image there a copy press, which is a photocopier that existed before photocopiers and printers existed, or scanners. And it's got an interesting process of transferring the ink from one piece of paper to another. And lastly, like one last detail about this office that I'd like to note is on the bottom right cropped image, there are just stacks of paper that are strung up in the air or like tacked to the wall or ceiling. And I, for the life of me, could not find a source for what those are. But I had seen them in so many period examples of offices or paintings of offices, even before the Victorian times. It's essentially like a little hook or a rock that um, hangs the papers or like spears all the papers together. And I think my best guess would be it's sort of like something to put waste paper on or just add like note paper to. I will never know. Or maybe it's for like bills that haven't paid and such. But regardless, they were there in the research, so I had to include them. As for research, these are some of the images that I have pulled references from for this background. So you can see on the top left one, I believe that's a slightly older example. I think it's like 1860s or earlier. And we see the standing desk, the very tall desk that clerks usually worked on with the sloped tops. We have the light at the top of the room, where you can see it's a double burning lantern lamp thing. And then on the bottom left, we actually drew directly from that cupboard, and you see a little glimpse of it on the right here. There are some papers on the insides of the doors that are out for display, and the one in the Daily Creed offices it's partially hidden by the header, but it says results, not excuses, count, and the little sign underneath that just says no advertising copy before a certain time. For the layout of the place, we actually drew inspiration from the bottom, the bottom right image, as well as this one in the center, where the center one obviously is like the boss is behind everyone watching them work, where the actual workers are at desks that are facing each other, which isn't too dissimilar from, office layouts in the modern day. As for the desks and the stools underneath them, you can kind of see it underneath this desk in the actual background. It's a bit shadowed because it's quite dark down there. But we use the stools with a rotating center pole that can be used to raise or lower the seat. That's the offices. But what is really sort of the star of this chapter, I'd say, is Hardwick's Science Gossip, which was a popular science magazine for the exchange of scientific knowledge from 1865 to 1893, and I believe it was continued after that as well in 1896 onward into like the 1900s. However, I drew inspiration from an 1875 compendium of science gossip, and this was essentially a way of the magazine was founded to be a more colloquial place to share scientific knowledge, and it copied sort of the format of another magazine from the day called Notes and Queries, which was more based on the humanities and is actually still active in the modern day. So we have Everett as a character, or Dr. Lewis as a character, who writes into this magazine quite often. And this magazine, I believe, was a bi-weekly edition. And you can see it says it is for the lovers of nature in that cover. Now, the actual contents of Hardwick's Science Gossip are quite varied, where it would usually start off with a long essay about a certain subject. So, for example, in this, the leftmost image here, it says the header is a few words about bees, and there's a very beautiful drop cap at the start of this paragraph. And then behind that, there would be some other longer articles about specific species or discoveries. For example, in the center image, the American chipmunk, which we would know as the chipmunk, I believe. And there's also illustrations of these discoveries and animals and cells and plant structures. And at the end of the Science Gossip edition, there would also be notices to correspondence, where there were people who would send in samples of specimens of like leaves and fossils and animals and insects. But the notices to correspondence column is interesting to me because it's essentially telling people what the fossils are and what the leaves, the things they've sent in are, and assessing them for value almost. Where that first one is like, well, the leaf you sent in was, had some interesting markings, but it's pretty common. Like, this is a pretty common thing to happen to leaves. And the rest are like, thank you for your great, your admirable fossil section sent us slides. Or like, this is a best example of a double apple that we've seen. So it's a really interesting column where you can see people are getting excited as individuals about science, and it really is like gossiping about science. If you go into, like, speaking of notes and queries, like, the Science Gossip magazine had its own section called Notes and Queries, which is where people would send in their contributions about the things that were in previous editions, or even just say something random happened. Like, for example, some people would say, oh, a certain bird was sighted at this place in London on this day. Or in the case of that middle image, there are two correspondents who replied to another correspondent, FCS, from a previous edition about carnivorous hedgehogs, where there are two people agreeing, I believe, with this FCS that yes, hedgehogs are sometimes carnivorous, and it's terrible. You can see that I'm not aware whether there is any positive proof of their crime in this latter case. Speaking of a hedgehog, and then the second one launches into an entire story about how they found this carnivorous hedgehog. But the one that I would like to call your attention to most is actually this top this rightmost example, which is titled "As Stupid as a Goose." And as mentioned in the text, in the game, sorry, it is an article or in the notes and query section called "As Stupid as a Goose," and it is essentially just going off about geese and going off about how people say that it's a common saying to say "as stupid as a goose," but actually geese are really smart. Like, not only does each flock know exactly where to return, but also who are members of it, and should any blundering individual by accident get into a wrong party, he or she is soon taught by hostile demonstration that no intruders will be allowed to fall into the homeward bound party. So it's a very like, the notes and queries section is a really interesting look at what Victorian scientific knowledge looked like and what sort of conversations were happening about it in sort of a social sense instead of in the objective, just scientific sense. And I believe that the people in these notes and queries sections aren't necessarily doctors or professors or scientists themselves. Some of the names are accompanied by markers like ALS, which we use for Dr. Lewis, which is Associate of the Linnean Society. Whereas a lot of these are just names, so like Baby Woodward, or an abbreviation of a name like JS. So it's a really interesting look at what people did as pastime almost in the Victorian times. And yeah, science gossip is a very fascinating thing, I think. And yeah, I think that brings us to the end of the stream, actually. Do you have any questions? Do any of you have any questions about the things I've just covered, or would like to know more? Just getting a little see you again screen ready. I don't believe music is playing right now. But actually, experts on these bits or pieces. I am a little too shy because at this point also it's like, what would we do now if we found out that something was contrary? You know, because we didn't consult experts up front. We did independent research for the most of it. And if we consulted experts now, I think it would be difficult to approach them and ask about the historical accuracy because, number one, our goal isn't complete historical accuracy, and number two, they may have opinions about the handling of historical accuracy or the lack of in fiction that we may not be able to reconcile. So it would be fun to have an expert on for a specific thing. Like, for example, if we wanted, we might be able to get a guest expert to come in and stream the game with us or something. But it might be more difficult to actually have expert weigh in the creation process. I'm gonna quickly go back to the Crosby Hall slides because during the break I actually fixed a bit. And I would like to go back and just add something where this is the slide that was missing earlier. And on the left here, you can see that there's an illustration of Crosby Hall in 1884 of the banqueting hall as it existed as a restaurant. So you can see you can see from the parallel between the background that you see on our slide. We've kept pretty true to that setting and that sort of look. Given we have referenced more of the 1907 images for the lights that are hanging in space and the actual look of the place, but you can see the structure is all there. And I wanted to note that its current location is in Chelsea, and it is now known as Crosby Moran Hall because it's owned by a man by the name of Christopher Moran. This is a quote on the right-hand side from Routledge's Popular Guide to London and its Suburbs from 1875. And it says, "For a first-rate cup of tea or coffee, try Crosby Hall. Ladies will find special provision for comfort at Crosby Hall." And there are two unique things I wanted to mention about Crosby Hall because, first of all, it wasn't a very common thing for women to eat out in the Victorian times. And at a lot of restaurants, it just wasn't common to see women there at all. So the fact that Crosby Hall allowed women in the restaurant and, you know, ladies could have a special room for themselves, etc., or a powder room, is a very unique thing for this time. I think it was around the 1880s onward that it became more popular that women could go out and eat. And another thing that was unique about Crosby Hall, as I found in I believe it was an 1868 book by the owners of the restaurant, is they employed a female waitstaff. So if you remember here, it says the young ladies that wait on us flitting about. Previously, I'm not sure if Crosby Hall was a pioneer of this, but by employing women, they were breaking from the norm of employing male waiters. And that certainly added to the popularity of this place with the working crowd of men, because women were typically seen in restaurants. Yeah, that is all I really wanted to say for this particular stream. And I think I will end it there. Be sure to follow us on our social medias as well as on Steam here with a wish list as well below. Subscribe to our newsletter at ofsensesoul.com/newsletter. You can see there are links in the description as well as you can see the links on the sidebars. And I will be saying a thank you for joining me. And hope you found this enlightening. And I hope you enjoy the game when it is finally out. Alright, see you all later. Bye bye.